All right, everyone, we start off today talking about Trying That in a Small Town, Jason Aldean's latest hit. It's become a hit partially because of the fact that CMT decided to censor the song, and they decided to take it down and not continue to endorse it because leftoids rampaged about some of the lyrics. Now, I'll start this off with a qualifier. I'm not a fan of country music. I don't care about what Sheryl Crow or Jason Aldean have to say politically. They're singers, so it doesn't really matter. And I would point out that there are a couple of flaws in the song, namely with regards to the small town sort of like Springsteen-esque bravado that we see here. The basic premise, though, is mostly true. It used to be more true maybe 10 years ago than it is now. This song is effectively about, like the rot in the inner cities, all the Antifa and all the bullshit that goes on. Fiery but mostly peaceful protests, and how you shouldn't try that in a small town because we got guns and good old boys down here. It's a little bit of the star-spangled bullshit, actually. And 10 or 15 years ago, the basic premise may have been true. I remember fondly when I was in high school, long ago, when I was studying driver's ed, actually. The teacher, because this is over summer, you're doing driver's ed, and the teacher would tell random stories, often about drugs for some reason, druggies that he knew, in between, the work that we were doing, when we were on a break, having a snack or whatever. And one of the stories was about how one time some New York City gangs actually came to the state fair to peddle drugs, and they got strong-armed. They got beaten up and sent home behind the Ferris wheel, actually, if I recall. And I believe the story. Again, 15, 20 years ago, that was definitely true. Small-town America didn't take the shit that the inner cities would take. They're just managed differently. That bravado, unfortunately, as we've seen over the last few years, is no longer really applicable. Small-town America is being wrecked by the crime that's seeping out of the inner cities on a day-to-day basis. This is no less evident from my hometown of Rutland, Vermont. I hear now stories all the time from people that are still back in Rutland about all the weird shit that's going on there. You've got a declining population, more and more homelessness. There used to be a homeless encampment out behind the Walmart Plaza in a little sub-industrial district over by some businesses there. Now there are two of them. That one grew to capacity, so now there's another homeless encampment over by the hospital, actually, within full view of the road. It's just a little miniature shit. It looks like a fallout settlement or something like that. My sister showed me pictures of this. Fentanyl is everywhere. And there are tweakers. I mean, it's not like there weren't before 20 years ago, but a plethora of tweakers, as in if you go out after dusk, you'll probably see some weird shit. Rutland always had a little bit of edge to it. There are a couple of spots in the town that always were a little bit, a little bit on the shady side. Probably don't want to go there around midnight. You might get away with it, but it's not the greatest idea in the world. Now it's more like, lock up your doors, you can get the drugs in or else they'll get stolen. You better not have your weed plant in the front garden because you find it missing in the morning. And that's basically the fate of Rutland. I don't expect, by the way, that it's going to recover from it because there's not a whole lot of native industry to, sort of re-spark its economy. It's got a marble quarry nearby. And Castleton expanded, so that's a saving grace. I don't know who would want to go to it at this point unless they're getting in-state tuition. But that's the fate of my small town. And it's happening all over the country. It's not just Rutland, it's all over the place. Crime has begun to seep out of the inner cities, much of it drug-related. Some related to human trafficking, of course, because of Biden's border policies. We now have over 10,000 minors alone, unaccompanied minors, who have disappeared from the system entirely. They are unaccounted for. They're being enslaved, or they're being raped, or they're dead by this point, and it's rather unfortunate. Federal policy and the policies of certain cities and or states has trickled down to small-town America and poisoned it. And so the bravado in the song, while it's admirable that you have these opinions about how the good old boys will fucking take care of business, leave us alone. Unfortunately, that's not what we're seeing. Now, small-town America is, by the way, even more sheltered, actually. Small-town America being mildly poisoned by the problems of blue state and blue city policies pales in comparison to what city suburban areas have to deal with. Imagine you're in a suburb of New York City. Again, 20 years ago, it's suburbia. It's, you moved there for a reason. You've got NIMBYism and, the housing authority to deal with, but you're probably not going to get stabbed when you're walking your dog at night to go take a piddle on a tree. Now you might get stabbed walking at midnight with your dog to take a piddle on the tree. You're probably taking a piddle too because, you probably became addicted to opioids at some point if you're in suburbia. And try that in a small town. Well, they are. Unfortunately, the government is deliberately attempting to sabotage small-town America. They're afraid of small-town America more than anything else because they do have guns and they have more property. Ergo, people on the fringes of small-town America are more self-sufficient. Government doesn't want you to be self-sufficient. You should expect them to deliberately attempt to abuse you. Indeed, that's what we see on a regular basis. With the migrant crisis, where do you think that they send the migrants to? Some states are deliberately sending them to New York City or Chicago or someplace like that, or to San Francisco, or to Kamala Harris's house. Or, and this is probably the best thing that DeSantis ever did, to send them to Martha's Vineyard so that they can briefly deal with those people. Oh, how wonderful, a little bit of diversity. Well, 24 hours later, we've had enough of that diversity. We want to go back to being 99.9% white Biden voters. And that's what happened. They sent them north. They sent them away from Martha's Vineyard. I wonder why they possibly did that despite their massive, massive amount of resources. Small-town America is under threat right now. And so while I appreciate the candor of the song, if not necessarily the song itself, yes, I forced myself to listen to it despite it being country music. And I just sort of sat there, but that's because it's not a genre that I like. It's not that there's anything wrong with the song. I thought it was funny, though, that the left is claiming the song is violent. This is unacceptable. Why? Because of the line where he says, hey, I've got Grandpappy's gun over here. I can take care of business if I have to. That's not a threat, and certainly not one that's legally actionable. I'm not understanding the offense other than the fact that it's a country song. Hey, dude, why don't you make a heavy metal song with similar lyrics? It would pass the smell test if it were heavy metal, and that's the other point. Country music is associated in the minds of liberal America with hayseeds, with bumpkins, with rustics, suspenders-wearing people with a lot of guns who all voted for Trump. If it were a different genre, if this were a rap song, nobody would give a damn. They wouldn't know it existed, and it wouldn't have been successful, of course, either. Sheryl Crow would not be bitching hypocritically about how it's a violent song and it's unbecoming. Sheryl Crow, Jesus Christ, what is this, 1998 or something? You're giving me flashbacks to my childhood. I don't give a shit about your political views. I just think that the song is wonky because it's sort of retro nostalgic. It tells a tale about a time that existed when I was a kid. It's the other flip side of irony here. Yeah, 20 years ago, 25 years ago, don't mess with small-town America. Probably a good idea. You probably should not go to a town of 15,000 people, all of which who have 20,000 guns among them, if you're an Antifa member. You shouldn't probably do BLM agitation in small-town America. But now, all the problems of the cities are already bleeding over into small-town America. This is nostalgic, almost boomeresque bullshit as far as the lyricism goes, because it's no longer applicable, unfortunately, to the modern time. Should small-town America be safe and be able to be left alone and tote guns and not do what Chicago does? Absolutely. Is that the current reality that the average person faces? No. The blight that was always there has spread. There's always going to be a little seedy part, one semi-dilapidated neighborhood in your small town. Certainly was the case with Rutland. With Barrie, it's more like the whole fucking town, although I think that, part of it has been flooded into half non-existence now. Basically in Vermont, the only town in the state that didn't have any blight was Montpelier. Well, that's because that's where all the lawyers and politicians live. In other words, they've got a different kind of infection. But the idea that these communities, picturesque for the tourists, the Main Street looks absolutely perfect. Go to Brattleboro. Main Street looks fine. Go off Main Street and see what you can see. Even 20 years ago, they had fucking problems. I remember it fondly, visiting my uncle and my grandma at the time, long ago. You go one block off the main road, and it doesn't look so picturesque anymore. But the tourists don't go to those parts of town. They come in on the highway, they schmooze off, and they go through the downtown to get Ben and Jerry's. And that's basically the reality that they think actually exists, especially in the state of Vermont. So yeah, you can try that in a small town now. You might get beaten up by the local good old boys or shot or something like that, and people are more likely to defend themselves with lethal force depending on the state law that's applicable. But it kind of is nostalgia boomerism to have this like, well, we're going to handle business down here in these here fields. 20 years ago maybe, 25 years ago, yeah, certainly. Now it's hit or miss. That's about all. Peace out.